Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy hoping to ride the momentum from the Gaza peace deal and a potential U.S.-Ukraine weapon swap. A Kremlin envoy says Russia and the U.S. should build a tunnel to connect the two superpowers, calling it the Putin-Trump tunnel. How the envoy wants to involve Elon Musk in the idea. The U.S. has conducted 6 strikes, or rather conducted, against Venezuelan drug trafficking vessels, which the White House says were carrying over 100,000 lethal doses of drugs. Democratic lawmakers say there is no justification for the strikes and are now seeking to restrict the operations. Federal prosecutors in Texas have filed terrorism charges targeting Antifa for the first time. Does Antifa's loosely structured nature complicate prosecution? Former National Security Advisor John Bolton appeared in a Maryland courthouse today to face an 18-count indictment. He said he's not guilty. President Trump refiled his defamation lawsuit against the New York Times, what he alleges about New York Times reporters.
This is NTD Newsroom, live from our global headquarters in New York City.
Thank you for staying with us. President Trump welcomes Ukrainian President Zelenskyy at the White House for their 4th face-to-face meeting this year. The leaders floating a weapons swap and riding momentum from the Gaza ceasefire to get peace for Ukraine. We now go live to NTD's Washington correspondent, Mari Otsu, at the White House. Mari, good afternoon. So what is the latest from this visit with Zelenskyy?
Don, good afternoon. As you said, this is President Zelenskyy's 4th visit to the White House this year, and he and President Trump say that this one, though, is different than the others because it comes on the heels of the Gaza ceasefire deal. Take a look.
You can carry the momentum from the Middle East deal over to this deal, and
I do.
So, how does that move the needle?
Yeah, I do. I think we carry a lot of momentum, a lot of credibility. Getting Middle East done was very important.
Congratulations with your successful ceasefire in the Middle East, and I think this is a momentum to finish Russia's war against Ukraine.
And in the meeting, President Zelenskyy presents a proposal where Ukraine would provide the U.S. with Ukrainian drones in exchange for the U.S. Giving Ukraine tomahawk missiles, the long-range cruise missiles. And in recent days, President Trump said that he is open to selling these tomahawks to Ukraine. But after Thursday's call with Russia's President Vladimir Putin, President Trump has softened his posture, saying in the meeting today, quote, "We'd much rather have them not need tomahawks." And on cutting off Russia's funding for the war, President Trump says this about India's purchases of Russian oil. Watch.
India will not be buying oil from Russia. And, they've already de-escalated, and they've more or less stopped. They're pulling back. They bought about 38% of the oil, and they won't be doing it anymore.
President Trump says that he's still expecting to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin in Budapest, Hungary in about 2 weeks, but that it's, quote, to be determined whether that meeting will be a bilateral with just Putin or whether it'll be a trilateral with Putin and Zelenskyy, although President Trump says it's likely to be 2 bilaterals, citing repeatedly in this meeting that Zelenskyy and Putin do not like each other. Meanwhile, President Trump also calls the threatened high tariffs on China, quote, not sustainable. Take a look.
November 1st, I could move it up if I wanted. A 100% tariff over and above what we get now. So that would make it about 157%. And China doesn't want that, and they want to talk. Our national security is secure because of tariffs. If we didn't have tariffs, we would have no national security.
President Trump says that his meeting with China's Xi Jinping will happen in South Korea in around 2 weeks, and we will be looking out for that. Don, back to you.
All right, Mari, thank you very much. Russia confirms that President Vladimir Putin agrees to meet with President Trump possibly within the next 2 weeks. But there are many questions about which route Putin will take to Hungary and where the summit is scheduled to take place. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pasdar has more.
President Trump on Thursday said that he agreed to a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, but Trump gave no date for the summit. Now on Friday, a spokesman for the Kremlin confirmed the plans, saying the meeting might take place soon.
The meeting could indeed take place within 2 weeks or slightly later. There is a shared understanding that it should not be put off.
The summit is scheduled to take place in Hungary, which is surrounded by EU member states. If Putin wants to travel there through the northern route, the plane has to fly above Poland and Slovakia. In case of the southern route, it would have to fly over Bulgaria.
The obstacles here are the EU ban on Russian aircraft in EU airspace. A decision will need to be made at either the EU level or the national level to allow a flight if that is where they're going to meet.
The Kremlin was asked which route Putin is expected to use when traveling to Hungary.
For now, of course, it is not clear. The foreign ministers of Russia and the U.S. will first hold a call and meet to begin discussing the topic and all related issues.
It's not clear yet if the European Union plans to grant Putin special permission to fly in EU territory to get to Hungary. But a spokesman for the EU Commission says the bloc supports the meeting.
First, to repeat that any meeting that moves forward the process of achieving a just and lasting peace for Ukraine is welcome.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban says he'll speak with Putin later on Friday to work on some of the details. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
Joining us to discuss is Paul McCarthy, Senior Research Fellow for European Affairs at the Heritage Foundation's Margaret Thatcher Center for Freedom. First of all, good afternoon to you, Paul. So this meeting comes, just a day after a phone call with Russian President Vladimir Putin, which he said was very productive. Can you tell us what is different at this point in time? How close are we to a peace deal?
Well, it's great to be with you. It is hard to figure out whether we are closer or not. But one thing that we do know is that Donald Trump is going to work day and night to end this war, as he did and is doing right now in Gaza, in the Middle East. And he's going to continue working very hard towards that. What we have to understand is Donald Trump has been very consistent on two things. One, he supports an independent Ukraine, and he also wants to end this war. And he is doing that by providing weapons to Europe and is expecting Europe to really step up to the plate as well with its own support for Ukraine, indeed their own defense support through NATO. This telephone conversation that the president had yesterday is an important step forward, and it is the way that President Trump really approaches peace negotiations. He wants to talk to both sides. So yesterday he had a conversation on the phone with Putin, and today he is meeting with the Ukrainian president. And I hope that we can come to an agreement on this terrible war where so many people have died.
So, Paul, we heard in that bilateral meeting between Trump and Zelenskyy, which is his third visit, actually, Trump said many times that Putin wants to see an end to this war. I'm wondering, what does Putin actually want, in order for him to really pull back his troops?
Well, I wish I could get into the mind of Vladimir Putin, but we know a few things about how he operates. He wants to make sure that Ukraine is unusable for the NATO alliance, first of all, but also as a Western ally, generally speaking. And he has done that by taking as much territory as he can to achieve that goal. What we have to do, and what I think President Trump is trying to do, is make the price too high for Vladimir Putin to continue his war of aggression against Ukraine.
What is your view on whether the U.S. should send tomahawk missiles? And that was one of the points, too, in that meeting.
I think that we focus too much on specific weaponry. There were previous debates about other types of weapons, should they be provided to Ukraine or not. What is important is that we give Ukraine the means to inflict as much damage on the Russian effort to defend their territory in the face of Russian aggression. And I believe that the United States will continue to do that.
And as well, Paul, perhaps you're aware of this already, but Russia's offensive momentum has slowed significantly by about 50%, and this is according to a new British Ministry of Defense intelligence report. What do you think about that? How do you read it? Is Russia at a point right now that it is more likely than before to accept a peace deal?
Russia is facing some severe economic problems that are gathering. There's a real economic storm gathering for Russia. And their debt is increasing. They are not able to put as much money into the war in Ukraine as they were doing before. And I think this is, I am not surprised at all, to answer your question specifically, that the Russian effort is slowing. As President Trump has mentioned time and time again, he has pointed out that Vladimir Putin's ability to capture territory has taken Russia a very, very long time, and pretty much a crawl over 3 years of fighting. So this should not be surprising. And I think that the United States, and I believe President Trump wants to do that, is to continue to give Ukraine the means to defend itself against Russia, to really grind their advance in Ukraine to a halt.
And Paul, as you're aware, President Trump has mentioned the cost of human lives in this war many times. Every time in a meeting with Zelenskyy and others, Trump is saying that thousands of soldiers are being lost every single week. How sustainable do you think this war is physically?
The sad fact of the matter is that Russia has more troops at its disposal to put into this war effort than Ukraine. And one of the problems that we have, so on the Russia side, you have these gathering economic problems, but on the Ukrainian side, you have the problem of men to fight on the battlefield. And it's a race against time, ultimately. And that's why Donald Trump is working very hard to bring this conflict to a conclusion as quickly as possible.
All right, I'll just end with this question. You said earlier perhaps there is too much of a focus on weaponry. So in your mind, what is the number one tool then that the U.S. can realistically use to as leverage right now to pressure Putin to end the war?
To be specific, what I meant is specific types of weaponry. Weaponry, of course, is very, very important to provide to Ukraine, and that will continue. What is going to be critical in this effort, and it's something that Donald Trump has said time and time again, is that the Europeans step up to the plate and provide not only military means, which are very, very important, including weapons, but also support to Ukraine in other forms, including support to the government, governmental operations, to hospitals and health and so forth, to keep the Ukrainian people fighting to defend their territory and in the future.
Okay, Paul, really great to speak with you today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's great to be with you today.
A Kremlin envoy says Russia and the U.S. should build a tunnel connecting the two superpowers. He suggests naming it the Putin-Trump tunnel. The envoy released this map showing that the two countries could be connected via the Bering Strait, which lies between Alaska and Siberia. A tunnel there would only need to be around 70 miles long. The envoy addressed billionaire Elon Musk in a tweet writing, quote, Elon Musk, imagine connecting the US and Russia, the Americas, and the Afro-Eurasia. Traditional costs are over $65 billion, but your boring company's tech could reduce it to under $8 billion. Plans for a bridge or a tunnel in the area emerged in the past already. There are numerous reasons for why it has never been built. One big obstacle is that no major infrastructure connects either Alaska to the rest of the US or Siberia to the rest of Russia. Some say that's why the tunnel would be located in an area where it wouldn't be of much use to either country. Joining us now to discuss Trump's meeting with Zelenskyy is Jim Gilmore, former U.S. ambassador for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Ambassador, always great to see you. Thank you for joining us today. So I want to ask you, now, Trump has met Zelenskyy about 3 times now in the Oval Office at the White House. He's met Russian President Vladimir Putin numerous times. What's different in this latest push for peace?
Well, I think what's different has been the discussion of the tomahawk missiles possibly going to Ukraine. And that's part of an overall shift that we've seen over the last several weeks, which is less towards Russia and more towards Ukraine, which, as you I'm sure know, I'm very happy about. I believe that winning the Ukraine war is critical. I believe that the president's tiredness with Putin, his willingness to be some more supportive of Ukraine is the right policy. And I think that's what's making the difference here. Now, it's a very complicated meeting, as you know, and Putin is doing his best to discourage the meeting, as we know.
So what is your view on whether the U.S. should send Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine? Should it remain a negotiation tactic?
I don't think it should be just a negotiation tactic. I think that we should send the missiles to Ukraine. There is risk involved with doing that, to be sure, because Russia is very unpredictable, deliberately so. But the risk has been forced upon us not by ourselves or by President Trump or even by Zelenskyy. The risk is being forced upon us by Putin. He's the one that started the war. He's the one that's determined to conquer Ukraine. He's the one that's committing the war crimes. He's the one that's destroying his own citizen and country in the process. We have to do everything we can do to bring this to a close. And the fact that tomahawks were put up on the table by President Trump immediately had Putin running to the negotiating table. And that meant that he called the president and begged for a discussion. And he probably threatened the president, but I'm not privy to that phone call. But he certainly told told Trump that he didn't think the Ukrainians ought to get the Tomahawk missiles. So in short, Russia did exactly what Russia does. They responded to force or the threat of force.
So to that point, I noticed, Ambassador, today Trump said on a number of occasions in that meeting that President Putin wants to make a deal to end the war. He said that a number of times. I'm wondering what needs to be in that deal for Putin to actually accept?
Well, that's actually the correct question, except that it's not what Putin should accept. It's what he has to be forced to do. Let me, if there's one contribution I can make to your viewers or to this discussion internationally, it is this. We have to stop talking about bringing Putin to the negotiating table. That is not the objective of the exercise. The objective is to drive Russia out of Ukraine. Putin will cheerfully go to the negotiating table if the United States and the Western powers are willing to surrender to him. Why wouldn't he? So, getting him to the negotiation table is not the point. The point is the outcome of the negotiation, not the fact of the negotiation itself.
So, in your view, can these two nations, Ukraine and Russia, sustain this war over another winter? Because we know Ukraine's energy infrastructure has been heavily bombed by Russia in recent weeks, putting millions in a desperate situation, for the winter months.
It's a terrible crime that's being perpetrated on Ukraine by Russia in an effort to conquer and in the long run reassemble the Russian empire. I saw a report that the private meeting with Putin and Trump in Alaska, Putin gave the president a lecture about Russian history, medieval history, in order to justify his aggression, which I think it's pretty clear that is delusional. if he really believed. Why would you say something like that to the president of the United States unless you actually believed it? And if he believes that, if Putin believes that, he is delusional, which means he's cost over 1 million of his citizens' lives, and God knows how much money and destruction on a fantasy about ancient Russian history somehow justifying crimes of today. This is a very difficult time, but I think there's no answer to this other than to provide Ukraine with what's necessary to bring this war to an end, and that could include the Tomahawk missiles. There is risk involved, to be sure, but it's not risk that we chose to run. It's risk that Putin is forcing us to run.
So, Ambassador, I heard this point during the meeting today that perhaps one of the reporters raised this, that perhaps Putin is trying to stall the U.S. In the situation right now. President Trump responded saying that he's been played before, but he's always come out on top. What do you think about this idea? Is Russia trying to stall here?
Of course they're trying to stall. They still are operating under the belief that with superior manpower that they can waste, they can ultimately bring Ukraine to its knees. And that's what they're doing by the attacks on their energy infrastructure right here at the beginning of the Ukraine winter. So that's exactly what they're doing. And anything that the Ukrainians could do to bring this war to a positive conclusion, Putin does not want. And so he knows that if he can talk to the president and he can persuade him to back off of Ukraine, that is a giant victory for Russia. But it seems to me that the correct thing to do here is to be realistic about this and to point out that the Russians will respond to force. There are things you can say to Russia in a meeting in Budapest that could bring the war to an end. But that would be to give Putin some face saver, not to actually allow him to keep the territory that he's stolen and to absolve himself from the responsibility of his war crimes.
Are there concerns in your mind that President Trump might ask for concessions on Ukraine's part? Because we've heard that talking point previously in this peace effort, to appease Russia, if you will. I mean, perhaps joining NATO could be one of those concessions.
No, I've never heard any recent discussion of Russia joining NATO. NATO is there to defend the liberty and freedom of the European countries against any outside threats. And that especially includes Russia, where it was established during the time that Russia was an aggressor nation. They are an aggressor nation again. But the main thing is this: we have to keep our eye on the ultimate outcome here. If Russia is able to conquer by violence and force and fascist aggression, you're going to get more of it in the future. This is the moment when the Ukrainians are fighting for their own freedom and security and their very lives, actually. This is the moment when empowering them to bring the war to an end by arming them appropriately. This is the golden moment when the 21st century could actually come out with a good outcome. It's all hinging now upon not just the United States, but also our Western allies, who have been stepping up to the plate more and more as the days go on.
And what do you think about security guarantees? Because Zelenskyy has said he wants that from the U.S. What role do you think the U.S. should play in Ukraine's security if Trump does manage to mediate another peace deal?
I don't believe either I or any other American ought to supplant the goals of the Ukrainians. They're the ones that are suffering this fascist onslaught. They're the ones that are losing their women and children, their heating infrastructure. They're the ones. But the fact is that this is a war that can only be brought to an end by forcing Putin to yield. So, yes, I think that it's always possible that Ukrainians will be asked to compromise, that they have to make that decision as to whether they want to compromise territory. I don't think they do want to do that. And I don't think that we should be trying to force them to do it. The only answer here is to arm Ukraine to defend itself and to be in a position to bring the war to an end, which I believe they've been doing, by the way, with their drone attacks on Russia's infrastructure. And if we continue on with the sanctions that the U.S. Senate wants to do, if we discourage people from buying Putin's oil, if we do these things, I don't believe the Russians can sustain this war.
Okay, Ambassador, just one last question. Do you think it's a combination of factors, or is there one thing that the U.S. has in its toolbox that it can use to, really force Russia to end this war and stop the fighting?
I don't believe that the answer to that question would be any military thing or object. The most important thing that the United States has in this war is to project resolve. If the United States projects what they're going to do, and we do so resolutely, Putin has to listen to that. I believe that the threat of the tomahawk missiles caused Putin to race to the negotiation table, to call the president on the phone, beg him to not allow Ukraine to get those missiles, maybe threaten Trump to not allow those missiles to occur. That American resolve and determination for the correct outcome is the most important thing that we have in this war.
All right, Ambassador, it was always great to speak to you. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you for the chance to be on.
Chicago police arrest several people as dozens of protesters gathered outside an ICE facility today. The facility has been the focus of protests since an immigration enforcement surge began last month. Protesters initially chanted and held ICE signs, anti-ICE signs. ICE erected barriers outside the detention facility to keep the protesters at a safe distance. As police advanced, protesters began scuffling and shouting obscenities. Illinois state police officers made several arrests. Police in the Chicago area have staged repeated protests against the stepped-up federal presence. In some cases, the protests became violent, with people attacking ICE facilities and agents. A Wisconsin man has been charged after allegedly posting TikTok videos that called for ICE agents to be shot and killed. 38-year-old Andrew Stanton was indicted Wednesday on 3 federal charges, including threatening to assault, kidnap, or murder a U.S. official. Prosecutors say the videos were posted between August and October this year from various accounts, but they believe Stanton was behind all of them. Stanton also allegedly made a post that encouraged more killings like Charlie Kirk's and sought information about the whereabouts of Israeli military agents in the U.S. Stanton has pleaded not guilty. His trial is set for December 15th. Texas Governor Greg Abbott is deploying the National Guard of Texas and state troopers to Austin ahead of a planned No Kings protest tomorrow. The governor described the protest as Antifa-linked. Antifa is a far-left extremist group that originated under the Soviet Union and functioned as the violent wing of Germany's Communist Party. The group generally labels its perceived enemies as fascists. According to its leaders, Antifa's mission is to stop people it deems to be fascists by any means necessary, including violence. Abbott's action follows President Trump's designation of Antifa as the domestic terrorist group last month. No Kings protests are also planned tomorrow in Dallas, Houston, and other locations across Texas and the United States. Federal prosecutors in Texas have filed terrorism charges targeting Antifa for the first time. Joining us to discuss is Jonathan Houlihan, President and General Counsel at Remnant Law. Good afternoon to you, Jonathan. Can you talk to us about the similarities and differences in this case compared to previous ones that involve political violence?
Hey, Don, thanks for having me on. Yeah, so this case involves 3 charges, 7 counts against the ICE facility attack in Texas on July 4th. I think the similarities of this is it's an organized attack on a government building using weapons based on political ideology. So if you look back at the Oklahoma City bombing, where a government building was targeted and it was struck, that is a similarity to what we see with the political violence, really going in political spectrum going into political violence. What's different about this, and we haven't really seen on a domestic level, we've seen it on the international level, of course, with the material support, count 1, charge 1, 18 USC, subsection 2339 alpha. I have the indictment here. That is more on a domestic material support charge. On subsection B, that's been used in a foreign context. So Al-Qaeda, any loosely affiliated groups, FTOs designated as international terrorist groups, whenever material support has been provided in that context, they use subsection B. What's different here, is they're using subsection A in more of a domestic context.
So, Jonathan, in past terrorism cases, the government charged groups that were officially designated as terrorist organizations. In this case, the charges are based on an executive order. So then my question to you is, how strong is the legal basis here?
Well, I think it's very strong. I mean, if you read the law and you read subsection A, there's no designation required. Subsection B does require a designation, an FTO designation, but subsection A doesn't require that. In fact, there's been several convictions under subsection A. So I think largely the EO identifies the group, it identifies the cell, but it's not a statutory requirement, frankly. So just the fact that they provided material support in this is an act of terrorism. I mean, it is what it is. It's July 4th. It's a political statement. They targeted police officers, ICE officers. It is an act of domestic terrorism. It is what it is. And no FTO designation, because it's not a foreign terrorist organization. Even a domestic terrorist organization is not required, but it does help kind of give it more of a understanding that it is terrorism.
But terrorism laws are designed for more organized groups, right? Does Antifa's loosely structured nature complicate the prosecution?
It could certainly complicate it. They could say it's political targeting. They could argue that, look, these were just a bunch of people that got together and committed a crime. It's not this terrorist network. There's no cell. There's no command and control. You know, it's not what you would traditionally see in an FTO designation. But if in the indictment, I mean, they're very careful. They talk about they organized weapons. They had training. They did all those things that would qualify and be defined under the law as material support. So at the end of the day, the acts of what they did does make it a material support charge under subsection A. It does meet those requirements.
Is it common, though, for prosecutors to charge individuals who allegedly provided support but weren't actually the direct shooters in a domestic terrorism case?
Yes. So the statute is actually intended for that support network, right? So material support. So logistics, providing weapons, providing training, providing money, all of those things are kind of complementary to catch up the entire network on the actual terrorist acts. So these individuals, the additional folks that were indicted, I mean, they had these encrypted chats that talk about the support they provided. So it is appropriate in this case, in all cases under material support. You really go after the network, you know, not just the actor. I mean, we've seen in the foreign context, you know, the terrorists will conduct an act, but what you really want to do is go after those groups that are financing, providing logistics, providing all those things that enable those acts. So I think what the Trump administration is doing, and smartly so, is they're trying to go after these networks, no matter how loosely affiliated they are. If they're in any shape or form providing material support, they're going to go after you, and they should. I mean, what we've seen across this country at these ICE facilities, targeting of law enforcement, you saw in the encrypted app, Blue Lives Don't Matter. They had specific intent to kill police officers, and we can't stand for that in this country.
So how serious is the charge of providing support to terrorists? What are we looking at here?
Well, if you look at just the material support, it has a maximum charge for the one count of 20 years. But if you look at the other charges, I'm reading them here. The attempted murder of officers and employees of the United States, counts 2 through 4, and that's under USC 1114. And if you look at attempted murder of officers and employees of the United States, we got that one. Discharging a firearm in retaliation to or in furtherance of a crime, that one alone carries a maximum penalty of life in prison. So in the aggregate, if you count all these charges, all 7 counts, they could face life in prison. So it's a very serious charge. And luckily, not a loss of life of one of the police officers, because it would have entitled the death penalty.
So, Jonathan, you brought this up briefly earlier, that some may argue that this is selective enforcement based on ideology. You touched on that a little bit. I'm wondering if you can elaborate more on this. How do you view that?
Well, they could say, look, this is a political talking point. They're designating, and this would be a defense perspective, not mine. You know, they're designating these loosely enabled cell as an Antifa, as this international group. But That's obviously not the case. It doesn't matter how loosely they're affiliated. If they're affiliated and they provided material support and they've conducted one of these acts, the intentional targeting and attempted murder of these police officers, it doesn't really matter. Other defenses they could raise, I mean, they could raise Fourth Amendment defenses. They could really challenge the definition of material support. Well, they would make some argument like, we were shooting at the range. It doesn't mean I was providing them specific training to go to this ICE facility and attempt to murder police officers. So there's many defenses they could raise based on the definitions of material support and this Antifa cell.
Well, okay, that about sums it up for today, Jonathan. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
Yeah, thanks, Don. Appreciate it.